we're now live, Chair. Sorry, we are live, Chair. I'm not sure if it's my connection.
For that. So we are live. So welcome everyone to the Children and Young People Scrutiny Board, Wednesday the 1st of March. Thank you for those who are tuning in and for those who are at the meeting. We will kick off the meeting. First item on the agenda is whether we have any substitutes nominated. I know that we've got somebody who's turning up later. We've been informed that Councillor Riveron will be later because of transport problems. But do we have any substitutes?
We don't have any substitutes, Chair. We have received apologies from the Youth Council.
From?
The Youth Council.
Oh, okay. Well, that's a shame. It's really useful to get their input on this one. But thank you for that. So let me remind members of the need to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or other interests that they might have in relation to the items on this evening's agenda, either now or as it crops up if it does. Anybody wish to declare an interest at this moment? Can't see anybody. No, we'll let you do it as and when if necessary. Thank you. Admission of the public. It's not recommended that the public be excluded from this meeting for the consideration of the items on the agenda. So welcome those of you from the public who have joined us. I hope you find the meeting useful and interesting. The next item is the minutes of the meeting on the 25th of January this year. You will have received those, members of the board. Do you have any corrections you wish to make on those, or can we accept them? Can't see anybody with a hand up, so let me propose we accept them. Are we all happy to do so? Would you like to
Yes.
agree that? Yes, thank you very much. So what I'm informed is that because I'd like to change the order of the items on this evening's agenda, I need to get your acceptance as board members for that. What I'm suggesting is that item 7, which is the front door report, comes after the safeguarding one. I feel the sequence will work better then, that sequence, and then we will move on to the third item on the agenda, which is the early years. Can I propose that? Does anybody have any worries about that, any concerns, or would you like to vote on that? Can we vote on that and say if we're happy to move item 7 to come immediately after item 5 on this evening's agenda? I'm proposing that. Anybody against us doing that? Can't see anybody against. Thank you very much for that. I think it'll work a little bit better in that order. So item 5 is the Safeguarding Children's Partnership Annual Report. It's an opportunity for us to consider the work of that group over this period. I believe, Julie, you're going to kick it off and in conjunction with Mick Brown.
That's right, Councillor Evans. Good evening, members and everybody, members of the board. Good to see you this evening. It's Julie Jenkins, Director of Children and Young People Services. Yeah, I'm joined by a couple of colleagues this evening, Councillor Evans, which I'll get them to introduce themselves to you. So the statutory partners of the Safeguarding Partnership are the Council, the Police and Health. So we've got colleagues with us, and we've also got our Safeguarding Partnership Manager with us, Julia, who you know as well. So I'll just ask people to introduce themselves. I'm just going to start with Mick from the Police.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Mick Brown. I'm the Superintendent in charge of operations for the police at Calderdale.
Lovely, thanks very much. Louise?
Evening, everybody. Louise Fletcher. I'm the Head of Safeguarding for Calderdale Cares Partnership, part of the West Yorkshire NHS ICB. Thank you.
Lovely, thanks, Louise. Julia?
Yeah, as Julie said, I manage the Safeguarding Adults Board, Safeguarding Children Board in partnership in Calderdale.
Lovely.
You're all welcome joining us.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Councillor Evans. We bring this report to you every year, and obviously it's a backward look. And we're just going to give you just a few highlights. First of all, Nick, of the backward look, and then I'm going to cover a few issues for you for the forward and the future plan and things we're going to be working on over the coming years. So I'll just hand you over to Superintendent Mick Brown.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. I suppose I can just start with just a bit of an overview, ostensibly, of the report, where we're at, and then I'll hand back to Julie to sort of take us further forward about where we're intending to go. Quite happy to take any questions once I've concluded my part, or potentially maybe at the end, because Julie might actually fill in some of the gaps, so to speak. So as you will see, the report is quite comprehensive. I hope you've all had the opportunity to read it and review it. I think it's a really strong report that highlights the good work undertaken by various agencies to put Calderdale, and primarily the children and young people of Calderdale, at the forefront of everything that we do. I think from a highlight perspective, I think you will see, and I think it evidence as well, that all statutory functions and functionality that need to be undertaken have been done so. I think what you can see there is that we are moving and adapting to try and meet the challenges that we face. I think you will note within there that we've undertaken our first a change to a CSPR, really, but basically a move away from the old serious case reviews to move forward to how we establish learning and wider learning from when children are unfortunately hurt or injured within the Calderdale setting. We've seen how that has worked. We've seen how we've been able to implement that. We've seen how we've been able to take the learning and how we've been able to do that in a multi-agency format, but also to do that and deliver to the wider agency and the agency staffing that we've got. We've done that through briefing, through training. We've undertaken one and completed one at this time. We've not been able to publish the results of that as yet, primarily because there are still ongoing criminal proceedings that need to take place, but we will publish at the conclusion of that. But actually, we have found some good learning, nothing hugely concerning, nothing hugely sinister, but just about how we all perhaps, I'll use the word professional curiosity. It's not necessarily directly there, but about hidden men and about how we need to make sure that when people tell us certain things, that we need to perhaps dig deeper to make sure who has active involvement in the lives of young people. We also have to recognise that there are many reasons why people might not always be open with us regarding that. So it's about us being more professionally curious and being a little bit more robust in that. But actually, I think there was some really good learning and things that we can certainly take forward. I think you will notice that the other thing about the statutory responsibilities that we've taken with that is that we don't just do it in isolation. We don't just look at the learning from children. We link that across the wider agency and partnerships. You look at how the learning from reviews can link into other reviews. So clearly, domestic reviews, domestic homicide reviews, clearly in most cases have a significant impact, not only on the victim, but have significant impacts on children. So we make sure that there is joint and effective learning there that is taking place to make sure that the children are at the forefront of everything that we do. In respect of statutory responsibilities, we've got everything in place that we need to do. We've got a number of subgroups that are chaired by leading members of the respective agencies, those subgroups which are listed within the report. And I know we're time bound and I won't trouble you with it, each and every one, but they basically ensure operational delivery. For want of a better word, they make sure checks and balances, that each agency is represented, that each agency is undertaking what is expected of them. They've got overarching responsibility. So there is a data performance subgroup, for example, which is my favourite. It would be because I'm the facts and figures man, I suppose, when it comes to, from a policing angle, in respect of making sure that we are delivering where we need to do. All of those subgroups report into the main group, to ourselves as the leads and the chairs, to make sure that they are delivering. I think we have seen a shift, and I think it's a positive shift towards more accountability from the chairs of the subgroups, to make sure that we're entirely happy that they are being delivered upon and that there are timeframes in place. So I think we're in a really, really solid position to move forward. I think the last couple of years have been unusual. I think probably we'll all agree with that. There has been a lot of refinding of feet and refocusing about how we move forward. I think you've seen shifts in society, societal shifts in respect of children, of where children are going to be school, where they're going to be educated. All of those things we're needing to move and adapt to meet. But I'm confident that we are there. I think one of the real strengths of the report, and it's difficult to get on a report because you can read what it says, but it gives you a flavour. It doesn't actually give you it doesn't give you the nuances, but it's a very strong partnership in my view. The partnership working across the board is excellent. I've been a policeman now 28 years. I've worked in various different guises of safeguarding, ostensibly leading major crime investigations. I've worked at 4 of the 5 districts now, and I think this is the strongest partnership that I've ever worked in and amongst. I think that we have open and adult conversations. Some of those can be challenging, and they need to be challenging because we need to hold each other to account. We need to understand each other's viewpoint, but we always do that respectfully in a really responsible way. But more importantly, we always come together. The can-do attitude that I see is really positive. I think some of the evidence of that is if you look at the partnership working that we've got ongoing in and amongst the report, it's been reviewed and scrutinised by an independent scrutineer from a neighbouring district who has, well, extremely positive regarding the report. I don't want to put words into that person's mind, but basically said the report is extremely strong. It favours really well when you compare it against other LSCP annual reports. They talk about the strength of the partnership. They talk about our engagement with young people. So it is a shame that we haven't got people from the young persons panel here, but it is there. It is something that we all have cognizance of. We need to listen to the people that we're here to serve, and that's where we can also take that wider learning. The partnership working continues to grow. We've seen recent reviews in respect to our front door approach, our MAST and our MASH. Now I know those are, some of those are obviously child focused, but some of them are domestic abuse focused as well. But the vast majority of domestic abuse have direct or at least indirect impact on children and young people. We have recently developed, shaped and changed our MARAC process here at Calderdale to make sure that that is robust, that it sits, it sits daily or did sit daily. But in addition to that, we brought an overarching meeting in, which is now in place to make sure that wider partners can all contribute to what we've got to make sure that information sharing, and I'm sure you've all heard this before, that information sharing is at the heart of everything that we do. And generally, if learning comes out, information sharing or lack of information sharing often comes to the fore. So we've tried to strengthen that to make sure that every agency is where they need to be, dealing, sharing information and looking at joint viable solutions moving forward. So a whole host of real positives from my view in that respect. I've talked about our data and performance. I think you look, most of the metrics that we've got are really strong. I can certainly speak with confidence regarding police metrics because obviously it's what I do on a day-to-day basis, but we've got the best overall criminal justice outcomes for child sexual offences in West Yorkshire. I think that's a strength of the partnership, not just a police issue. This is everybody working together to share information to bring people to the fore. We've got the best domestic abuse outcomes. And when I talk about outcomes, that's about charging and placing people before a court. And again, that's indirectly linked to children. And I don't think you can take away the damage that domestic abuse can cause directly and indirectly to children, their emotional, physical well-being and development. So there's real positives being taken place there. Obviously, everything that we look to do is it looks to actually reduce and mitigate against that. So one of the things I'm extremely proud of, and I know as a group of people we're pleased about, is the fact that we've got the lowest domestic abuse repeat rate in West Yorkshire, which means that we're actually stopping or reducing the domestic abuse and the domestic abuse repeat rates through a combination of engagement and support. So that's in combination with some of our wider partners as well, to make sure that we're not just looking at criminal justice outcomes, but we're actually looking at people addressing substance misuse, people looking at attending courses where they can address their offending behaviour to try and make sure that children are at the heart of everything that we do. So I think there's some real positives there, and I think the metrics sort of bear that out. Lastly, I'll just touch upon workforce development. We've had over 4,000 practitioners have completed a safeguarding e-learn, that's multi-agency. 80 practitioners have been there face-to-face to pick up on that direct learning, and that is the tip of the iceberg, because all of the agencies have got their own internal safeguarding practice review, learning, e-learning, direct delivery. I deliver some of my own training to some of my frontline staff to make sure they're aware of what they need to look at, and even wider than that, if you take it just away from the practitioners at the front line, we're rolling out PolEd, which is a police-led education programme being delivered into schools to educate not just the people that work within the schools, but primarily the young people to knowledge is power, information, confidence, to enable them to be aware of some of the wider pitfalls of life. I think it's a lot more challenging now for young people than it was when I was a young person. The dangers of online abuse, CCE, CSE, also not only about keeping the young people safe, both in cyberspace and on the streets, but also identifying to young people how their own behaviour on occasions can be seen as offending behaviour. Because obviously what we want to do is we want to make sure that young people don't become victims of crime, but we also want to make sure that young people inadvertently don't become offenders directly or indirectly. So I think that is a fabulous resource, and again probably further strength to the partnership. PolEd is being rolled out across West Yorkshire, and the highest uptake of schools is in Calderdale. Not by number, obviously, because we have a lot less schools, but percentage wise Calderdale leads the way, as it does in most things. So a snapshot from me there really is how I see the last year, but really positive. As always, there are areas that we want to develop. Julie, who will talk about that probably in a moment or so. So I'll leave it with yourself, Chair, whether anybody wants to ask me any questions now or whether you want to come back to me once Julie sort of concluded that piece.
Thank you very much, Mike. It's you're absolutely right. There's a huge amount of data in here, isn't there? And it's very impressive. My only request would be for future, is there somewhere that we could have like an overview of the thing to pull it together for us? To a certain extent you're doing that yourself, and I'm sure Julie will, and so on, but as a sort of learning point for us as people who, just like yourselves, are very busy with things. If there was some sort of overview, it would help us on that one. So if I could just make that general point first. Julie, do you want to carry on with your various presentations and then we pick up the points? How's it best for you?
Yeah, I think so, Councillor Evans. I'm not going to say too much. I just want to touch on a couple of things that's coming up over the next year, and then we can get into some questions and discussion from Scrutiny Board members. Yeah. For the next year, there's a couple of things, and a lot of these are kind of responding to the national context, and the first thing I wanted to mention was the cost of living impact on families. We know there's a very strong correlation between poverty and deprivation and poor housing. On child protection cases generally, and we know that is having a real impact on families across the country, but also in Calderdale. So Julie has done a really good ready reckoner, lots of questions for partnerships to ask about what's the intelligence on the ground, what are we hearing about how families are living, what are some of the struggles, is it impacting on what we're seeing coming through in the system, and is there anything that we're missing that we could do? So that's one of the things that we're doing, as part of the safeguarding response to the cost of living situation that we've got. The other is, Mick has already touched on this, what we call contextual safeguarding, but it's really where the traditional child protection system that is there to protect children from abuse within their family. And we call these kind of internal family factors. And this is for young people that are being pulled from outside the family. So Mick's touched on it already with child sexual exploitation and child criminal exploitation, that's CSE and CEE, is where the pull for young people is outside the family, from networks, from gangs, from friends, etc. So it puts a very different focus on the work that's needed. So we are going to do quite a lot of work on that over the coming year around safeguarding our young people. We do have more young people that are coming into care for lots of reasons, but teenagers, whereas usually we would be dealing, or not usually, but probably historically be dealing with much younger children coming into the child protection system and then into care. So we are going to work on that as a partnership. The other thing to mention, and you are going to have a report on this coming up at another scrutiny, so in the near future. So I'm not going to say too much detail, but there has been a national review of children's social care, as you know, by Josh McAllister and a team. and the government has responded to that review, and there will be changes for us in the child protection world. There'll be changes to working together, which is the guidance, but there'll be changes to the practitioners and the type of people who are working with families. For example, children in need cases, the level below child protection, there is a proposal and a consultation about should actually professionals from different areas, different walks of life, not social workers necessarily, be able to manage and hold those cases. So there'll be changes coming in terms of the workforce, in terms of the child protection workforce. There's lots of pilots, lots of consultation. There isn't anything immediately, but you will be getting a presentation on this either at the next scrutiny or the one after that. I think that's it. I think I'll leave it there, Councillor Evans, so we can get into some questions and things. Yeah.
Yep, that sounds good. You don't want colleagues to come in at this point, but they can answer some of the questions then.
Yeah, for myself or Mick and Julia, and Louise as well. Okay.
Yes, as I say, I would just make my general point about it would be useful to have a sort of summarising element to these things, if at all possible. And the other general point that I wanted to make was, Mick, you've made a lot of talked a lot about joint working, and clearly that's a critical area for it. I think it will be interesting. It's good to hear all the positives, but equally it will be good to hear if you feel there are any other elements that we should be taking into account where we could improve that working together side of things. I think some of the things that Julie's already made reference to will help that. But other members, rather than me taking over. Can I see any hands up at the moment? Yes, Danielle, Councillor Durrance, I can see first off at least, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a couple of questions, so I can just do one and let somebody else come in, or I can see how things lie.
Right, okay.
One of the questions I wanted to ask was in reference to and I might have made the wrong term with this, sorry, there was a lot of information, the mystery of the hidden men, the target around that. I was just wondering really within that, I think that was a 2021 reference or target, and within COVID there was quite a few worrying cases of serious child neglect and deaths that was largely based around women who was the perpetrators of most of that. I just wondered if that would pose any missed opportunities if we've kind of got or within that work there is a focus on, I think it said male caregivers within the home who are potentially not there when professionals visit. So that was kind of the thing that sparked my mind. So shall I leave that there, Chair, and then let that?
But remind Danielle, and we'll let them respond to that. So who wants to respond?
Do you want me to come up? Do you want me to come in first? Yeah. In Calderdale, really aware of that. A previous child safeguard serious case review, actually, it was. We had a significant other in a sister-in-law, actually, and that was a significant other which should have been assessed and and counted within regards to risk assessment and safety for children. So we are very aware. So our guidance that we've produced is actually called Hidden Men and Significant Others. We've absolutely recognised that title, and going forward, it will absolutely be in line with the national findings and obviously the Star Hobson case, which I think obviously you're referring to too. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you want me to let someone else come in, Chair?
Shall we do that? But remind me to come back, please.
No worries.
Dot, Diana, and Sheila so far. So, Dot, do you want to come in next?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at. Thank you for the report. It's a fascinating and very interesting read, and a lot of substance to it. Just looking at the section on the Child Death Overview Panel. And the links that are made with that towards smoking prevention and also rates of co-sleeping and unsafe sleeping arrangements. And I'm just wondering, as it's all within the same sort of section of the report, how many, if any, of the child deaths were related to either smoking or co-sleeping and unsafe sleeping arrangements? I'm just wondering, because there are safer ways to co-sleep, and I'm not sort of, you know, saying that, you know, having a baby in a cot isn't the most ideal, but you know, that there are ways of co-sleeping that don't pose a danger or so much of a danger to baby. I mean, I've managed to co-sleep with all mine, and they're all still kicking and grown up and taller than me now, apart from my daughter. She's a short ass. But yeah, you know, it's not something that should be excluded, because for some women it really works. When you've got a toddler that doesn't sleep during the day and a baby that doesn't sleep during the night, co-sleeping is, you know, it certainly was for me, an absolute saviour, because, you know, I got enough sleep to stop me going crackers through lack of it. So it is something that can really work if it's practiced safely. But I just wondered about the link between the co-sleeping and the smoking and the child deaths, and whether there was one. Thank you.
Shall I start? And Louise might want to come in on this one, I'm guessing. But yeah, what you're saying, again, we absolutely recognise. And actually, if you look at the instances where there have been unsafe sleeping arrangements, they tend to be in crisis, where families have just moved, there's somewhere they've fled domestic abuse, there's somewhere they're sleeping at a different person's house and the cot isn't set up. The arrangements are that they're sleeping on a sofa bed. You know, those are the examples from across Calderdale, Wakefield and Kirklees, which is where the area covers. So it absolutely it is, and that's why we've done the work with wider professionals rather than just health. So people who are coming across these you know, families in crisis, social care, etc., are aware of, and has your baby got somewhere safe to sleep? But yeah, and the links between alcohol, substance misuse and co-sleeping are obviously well known. I'll let Louise come in, who can speak more coherently.
Yeah, so the Every Sleep is Safe Sleep, it was threefold really. So it was a risk minimisation tool, just as Julie has explained. It was to help practitioners from whichever format they were, to support families to identify what the potential risks could be, and we didn't exclude mum sharing beds. The advice was to do that safely. So it was highlighting all the risks around safe sleep. There was a training package developed as well, and that's gone not just across Calderdale but across West Yorkshire. So if mums chose to sleep with the babies, that was recognised as being okay, and just looking at all the risk factors to make sure that it's done in the safest possible way.
Thank you. If I might come very quickly, Chair.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm really pleased to hear that recognition has been made. My children are 15, 23 and 25 now, and certainly when the older two were, I was you know, fairly well told off by the midwife, my health visitor, everybody, who just said, no, you should not, absolutely should not safe sleep, you should not co-sleep at all, no matter what. So yeah, it's good to hear that that it's recognised that there are safe ways of doing it. You know, I don't drink, so that was, you know, eliminated one risk factor straight away. But yeah, it's good to note there is a balance there. Thank you.
Good, thank you for that. Diana, Councillor Tremaine.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I might have one or two other questions, but we'll see who else asks them. Just one thing that was highlighted, I want to say, first of all, it's so thorough and very impressive to see the amount of joint working that's going on, and that is really crucial here. I was interested in, on page 20 of the report, page 30 of our papers, there's a point about external audits and the one around children who are looked after from out of, and here from out of area, and just some concerns there around discrepancies about, you know, how that information gets to all the right people if that happens, and obviously that's been highlighted, and it sounds as if that's being looked into, but I just wondered if there's any more that could be shared around that, and how we're managing to make sure that you know, people don't fall through the gaps there.
Shall I start again? Apologies, colleagues. Yeah, absolutely. And so following that audit, and that was particularly done with a health lens, looking at the health services that were impacted due to children who were looked after from other areas being placed into Calderdale. It is a significant issue. We've got very, quite cheap housing, for people to set up the, residential care, and the actual impact is on every service. It's on police when children go missing. It's on every service. So what we've actually done as a partnership is we've asked some independent experts to take a look at this for us, to see exactly what's going on in Calderdale with regards to number, demographics, the impact on the children who are looked after from other areas, the impact on children in Calderdale, the impact on services, what we're actually doing to support those young people, to support communities, and seeing if there's any best practice from anywhere else that we can actually implement either here, or if there's anything that we can maybe raise nationally, because actually this is a national issue. It's not just an issue for Calderdale. So we've just commissioned that piece of work, and so that will be starting soon. Yeah.
Good. Thank
Will we be
you.
able to get that reported back on at some point? It would be really interesting to sort of see how that's going.
It's likely that will be in the next annual report that we
Yes,
feed
well.
through. I should think, yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just come in and just follow on from Julia? So just answering your question, really, in that audit that we completed, we did identify, like you've just suggested, that there were some potential gaps in notification, especially for health partners. And so we've set up a process with children's social care that every month we do a checks and balances. So any children that have moved into the area and children's social care have been notified, we're ensuring that we're notified of the same children to stop those gaps.
Thank you.
Good. Shall we come back to you, Diana, on some of the others if they're not picked up? Okay, good. So I've got Sheila Hurst. You put your hand up.
Thanks very much. Thank you for the report, and it is very detailed, and it's very impressive, about the links and the agencies and everybody working together for our children and young people. Julie made reference to the fact that, places where there's deprivation and poverty, does have an impact on the safeguarding of our children. And what I felt I didn't feel from the report, and maybe I've missed it because there's a lot in there, is what are people doing, the agencies in working together to sort of focus on those areas of deprivation and poverty? What extra are you doing in there, sort of preventative wise, for safeguarding? Because obviously the earlier we deal with things, the better the outcomes and the sooner the outcomes, and especially in those areas, like Overton Park, Whalley and things like this. What are you doing different in those areas to mitigate the link, really?
Absolutely. It's the early intervention, isn't it? Yeah, so someone want to come back on Sheila's question then.
Yeah, I'll come in, Councillor Evans, if that's okay. Yeah, Councillor Evans has just, used the words kind of early help, early intervention, and we've actually got a lot of services on the ground still there, which is great. The children's centres is an open access offer, as in every single part of the borough, but particularly there to support families very early in the in the child's journey. We've done an awful lot of strategic work around breastfeeding, which is free, reading to your children, getting them ready to start school. So there's an awful lot that's done in the early years sector, but it's done right across the piece as well, within schools and every setting, just trying to identify families that may be struggling. And I think if we look at the response to poverty itself, we've talked before here, haven't we, at Scrutiny, about the Healthy Holidays Fund in particular for children who are on free school meals, but for the children as well to get fed during the holidays, but also to have some activities where they're learning and developing as well. When we get to the sharper end of neglect and children not being cared for properly, that's where things really come into being around a lot of practical support for families. We've got a family intervention team that do a lot of work on routines and parenting and do 3 times a week visits, are in there supporting families. There's some simple things, Sheila, like teaching families how to cook. not just getting stuff and buying stuff, you know, kind of cheaper food off the shelves and going back to basics. I don't know if you remember Jamie Oliver's food kind of focus of teaching parents how to cook for the kids. So there's an awful lot of practical work that's done. And, you know, when the chips are down and families have no money at all, we will always step in and make sure the house is warm, that there is food, that children, that children are being fed, and schools do an awful amount of a lot of work on this, as you know, with breakfast clubs, after school clubs, making sure children are getting healthy snacks and the healthy food agenda. And you've looked at this yourselves as a scrutiny, haven't you, about healthy school food? So I've got to say, it is right across. It's everywhere you look. We do identify and spot the families that are struggling and the children that are struggling around this whole poverty agenda, and make sure that we can support where we can. I won't go into the cost of living support that's there from the council, but I will drop into the chat. I think I've shown you before, but there's an awful lot of resource there around every aspect of fuel, money, bills, nappies, you name it. But I'll drop it in the chat just so that members are aware what's there as well. There's an awful lot of support and places that you can go, as well as the food banks and things.
Thank you for that, Julie. I just want to like the fact you referred to healthy eating and then reference when the chips are down. So I wasn't quite sure whether that was appropriate or not. Sorry. Too much levity is not appropriate. Danielle, do you want me to come back to you with one of your questions? As I've not seen others so far. And then Diana.
Thank you, Chair. Actually, a couple of mine have been answered, but one of them is just on the back of Sheila's. Again, similar, when we're looking at specific areas of need around poverty and deprivation, one thing, I guess, I live and represent one of those areas. And when we're talking with partners in our regular meetings and things that come up, I know the youth kind of work that was going on, they highlighted mental health, which is so important. I just wonder how different it was with priorities for different areas, because we're constantly being brought up with issues around the use of nitrous oxide, knife crimes, and that didn't really come forward within it. And I get that it's not all areas of a priority, but in some areas it's a real concern, and I wondered what targeted work was happening in those areas where it is more of a it's a concern everywhere, but it's a real issue that's on the ground already in some of our areas. So I just wondered what was going on and what work is being kind of targeted in that.
Yeah, I guess the
places.
Nitrous oxide one is one that we suffer from adjoining your area as well. So yes, so who wants to respond to Danielle's question there?
Yeah, I'll just start, Councillor Evans, and I'm sure Mick would probably like to come in, particularly on some of the police operations and the violence reduction unit about carrying knives, etc. But yeah, we do use the intelligence that comes up from each of the geographic areas in Calderdale to do a couple of things in relation to youth justice and to the youth service. We have got commissioned open access youth work, the normal kind of youth clubs and work, that you would have, that you'd imagine a youth club to do. And we actually have doubled up in your area, actually, Councillor Durran's in Ovingdon and Mixenden, because we know that's a high area of deprivation. And what we do is, between the community safety staff and the youth justice staff and the youth work staff, that we look at what's coming through about antisocial behaviour in areas, and then we've got targeted youth workers who work out the orange box. So when we know that there's something happening, for example, it may be in the market, in Brighouse, I'm just using that as an example, that we can deploy targeted youth workers to go out there in the evening and engage with young people, have those conversations with them and try and get them back into some positive activity. So, and it's the same with the Youth Justice Service. We spend quite a lot of time at the Youth Justice Board having a look at the geographic areas, as well as lots of other factors, looking at disproportionality and making sure that we can deploy, that we've got our staff and the programmes working in those areas and looking where the intelligence, what is it telling us across the borough. So we do quite a lot of work on that. I wonder whether, do you want to come in particularly on knife crime and responding? Because I know you've got your neighbourhood policing teams as well, haven't you, on the ground?
Mick, you're on mute.
My apologies. Yeah,
We'll do it. We'll do it.
Yeah, it's certainly in respect to knife crime and violent crime. We have our violence reduction unit. We have a team of officers under the guise of Operation Gemlock that are extra to Calderdale police officers who can come in and do come into Calderdale when we identify hotspots or areas of concern. We can meet that in many different ways, which can be through education. It can be obviously through enforcement, which primarily sits with the police. We link in with the schools and other educational establishments, looking at knife archers to make sure that that young people are not taking knives into school. We try and make sure that our early intervention team, of which we are heavily invested for the size of the policing team here, are out engaging only, well, trying to discourage young people from carrying knives, but those more importantly, potentially, that are caught carrying a knife, receive education, guidance to, you know, because sometimes placing young people just through a criminal justice system doesn't actually achieve the outcome that we want. Achieving the outcome is to make sure that young people don't carry knives and you understand the reasons why. When we have locations or priority concerns, we have high demand areas where we can redivert our resources, particularly our MPT resources, the PCSOs and their neighbourhood policing teams. And all of those are done through analytical products. We have a daily management meeting, which I chair in the morning, where we look at what's happening in the last 24 hours and emerging pattern and trends. And that will then set the tone for the day. And then we have wider strategic meetings where we look at patterns of concern. So, for example, it's tomorrow actually, we will look at crime accountability meetings, and we will look at what we call a tactical assessment document, in which case that sort of gives us facts, figures, patterns. And we've got a really fabulous tool called Power BI, which gives us a real quick snapshot of lifetime performance issues and lifetime issues of where things are happening, so we can bend and flex our staff accordingly where they need to be. Obviously, it is a concern. I'm not going to say it's not. I think that we have, or we do see very low knife crime numbers in Calderdale, and you know, I mean, you can't become complacent, but I do feel that we've got a really quite good combination of robust management through enforcement, coupled with engagement with partners to try and mitigate some of the risks that come with that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Diana, Councillor Tremaine, did you want to come back with any other questions? And I've seen Dot's got a hand up again as well. But... Yeah,
if you don't mind, could I just come back, just following up a little bit around kind of
please.
Young people and the young advisors section, which was interesting in the report, and obviously that voice of young people is key. And just a couple of things around that really, that the poll which they did a few years ago now highlighted certain kind of key areas of concern for young people, and it was kind of interesting looking at those three. Obviously, mental health is still, sorry, no, this is the more recent one, isn't it? The 2022 one, mental health and the impacts of COVID, and then exploitation, and those three concerns there that were obviously highlighted. How does the safeguarding partnership, how do we kind of work to reassure young people about those areas and how they can be supported and how their voice can be heard? Because obviously that's crucial.
Shall I come in there, Julia? I'll just talk a little bit about the Developing Well work, actually, because that's kind of whole scale that's happening at the moment. We have done some work as a health and wellbeing board in Calderdale, and it's around the 4 life courses. So you'll hear about starting well and developing well for children. For developing well, we've asked young people to set the goal for that piece of work that's happening, and it's for every 6 to 25-year-old in Calderdale to have hope and aspiration when they're 15, which is a very specific kind of goal that young people have asked us to work on. So what we've said is we don't want to be a board that's looking at all the work, because there are lots of partnerships working on this around mental health. As I'm sure you know, as a board, there's the Open Minds Partnership as an example. That we didn't want to duplicate any work. So we're actually doing a piece of work at the moment. It's actually started and it's underway It's called an appreciative inquiry way of trying to have a conversation with as many young people in the borough, and to be able to do that on a regular basis about the things that are important for them, the things that we've already got in place, the things that we may need to develop that are a little bit missing, and to close that feedback loop and to make sure that they're telling us and then we're responding. So what they said and what we did. So we're just doing that at the moment because there is a lot of work going on about skills, about jobs, work apprenticeships, mental health. Young people worry about and have anxiety about a lot of things, but there is a lot of positive work going on in the borough. So we don't want to duplicate anything, but we are looking at a sustained way of talking to our young people on a regular basis, that it isn't a one-off communication and consultation exercise, that we will keep talking to them. So we're in the middle of doing that. So I'm sure as we get into the results of that later in the spring and the summer, that you as a Scrutiny board would probably like to have a report on that, and just to hear what our young people saying. Normally we'd have the youth parliament here as well, wouldn't we, to be able to give us a bit of feedback too. So I'd suggest, Chair, that you consider that as part of your work programme.
Thank you. Noted. Is that okay, Diana, on that question for you?
Yeah, thank you. That's very useful.
I just wanted to add, I've got Dot down, and Chaz has got his hand up now as well. Just following on from that sort of survey that Diana was referring to, it was very interesting to note that the mental health issue was like 2/3 of 2,000 young people, 2,000 plus young people, which is understandable, and we're aware of that issue. The one that surprised and almost shocked me was that 35% of them referred to exploitation. We're aware that it's an issue, obviously, a major issue, but it struck me that it was a very significant number. We're talking about 700 plus young people in that survey who actually raised exploitation, gangs, violence, knife crime, and so on. We've made some reference to knife crime and sexual exploitation as well. That young people are instigating that in as part of the conversation. I mean, I just wonder whether some of it is because it's in the press and in the media a lot, or is it actually that young people do have, from own experience of their friends and family, of exploitation? And if that's the case, that is very worrying, isn't it? Sorry, yeah. I'm getting excited, am I, on this one? But
yeah, and I think it's a mixture of all of those things that you've just said, and I think it's what concerns young people, as Mick has already alluded to. We do have a quite very low numbers of known, gang violence, knife crime, compared to just our neighbouring authorities, let alone wider. I don't think it is that that 700 people are seeing it. I think this is a concern and tied into bullying and things that go along with that, and perceived kind of threats to them as a young person. Yeah, was perceived as the biggest threat to them. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Thank you for that. Dot, and then I'll come on to Shaz.
Thank you. Just got a couple of questions around the the independent scrutiny insurance performance management section. I'm looking at the paragraph on fixed term exclusions and permanent exclusions, and just wondered if you're able to share any information from the inclusion group yet that's been set up, and if not, if this could be added to the agenda for a future meeting. And secondly, sort of a couple of paragraphs down, you have information about the dental health and dental checkups for looked after children. Do you have any figures for the dental visits in the general population of children? Because I'm aware from casework that a lot of parents are struggling to find an NHS dentist at the moment. They are quite literally as rare as hen's teeth. And so children's dental health has historically been a significant issue. I think it's the primary reason for children's admissions into hospital for general anaesthetic is to have teeth out. If I'm correct, and please tell me if I'm not. So yeah, it'd be very interesting to have any information on that if you have any. Thank you.
Who wants to pick that one up?
So the two separate issues, potentially Paul's on the line. Paul Tinsley will be cursing me, but maybe Paul or Julie about the inclusion and maybe Louise about the dental, I would suggest. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to take that one, Chair. Just on the exclusions issue, it is a concern. It has been looked at, I think, by the council leadership team. We are setting up a new Education Inclusion Partnership Board with the view of the whole of the education healthcare community coming together to look at this issue as a concern, to look where the gaps are, and to work with our partners in schools just to see what we need to do to reduce these rising numbers. So that we've got, I've just approached somebody who I hope will be able to chair that for me. We're looking for a governor representation to sit on that panel, and the first board meeting will be shortly after Easter. I'm writing out also to chairs of governors and chairs of trustees just to, well, with Julie's support, really to make the point that it is a concern to us. There are certainly educational implications and financial implications because we have to commission more places. So we are working hard with our schools. They recognise it's an issue, and you know they don't want to see these high numbers either. But it's something that we need to see. We need to work together on. It's a systemic issue, and we need to make sure that the system works better for our children and young people on that particular issue.
Thank you. So who's going to pick up the next one?
So I think the question was around dental data for children, for all children. That's not something that I would be able to pull out of my brain at this moment in time. It's something I could certainly explore. From a children looked after point of view, the figures have increased significantly better. We have got a flexible commissioning dental package that's available now for children looked after, so that for children who are struggling to be seen by a dentist, we've got this flexible commissioning. What is new from an NHS point of view is that the dental commissioning is actually coming under the West Yorkshire Integrated Care Board in the next 6 months, which is new, and that's coming down from NHS England, and that would hopefully give us some more influence around the dental commissioning going forward, and that's something that we're hoping from a West Yorkshire ICB that we will be able to influence more and look at that in more depth. But I can't provide you with those figures right now, unfortunately.
I think you've got away with that one. Dot's smiling on that. But yeah, dental work is an ongoing issue, isn't it? I'm sure we'll pick up at some point again. Shaz,
figures, don't worry.
Yeah, certainly. For Michael, there have been 2 occasions where my son has been stopped by police officers when he's not done anything wrong. And I just want to know whether there is that racial profiling element still being carried on in Calderdale. This was in the town centre. He's a very bright lad, and his teachers considered him to be one of the best kids in their class in terms of education and behaviour. And there were a group of lads. He and his friends went for a game of football and came out and was stopped on 2 occasions. And on one occasion, the officers made a video film of the lads and asked them to do a twirl. Is that the standard practice? And on one occasion, they realized later on that the guy that they were chasing, or lads they were chasing, were white, not Asian lads. And they were stopped on 2 occasions for no apparent reason. And I was shocked. And I said, in future, if officer does this to you, get his badge number and his supervisor's details, and I will try and investigate for you guys. So what's the situation with regards to this, Michael, in terms of searching young lads for no apparent reason? And the second is for Julie. As you know, in Park Board, we've had this discussion before. We don't seem to have much for youth services in Park Board. And we've had discussions before, trying to see whether we can get more for Hemad. So rather than orange box, there's something available for young lads in park, because we have a similar situation as Danielle's ward. We have a lot of young lads, and we do have issues with young lads, and that needs tackling. So Julie, what are your officers doing for Park Ward? What are your future plans? That's for you, Julie.
Mick, do you want to come in on the first one? Yeah.
Sorry,
absolutely. I can't talk about the individual circumstances with your son, because obviously I don't know the full circumstances. In respect of stopping and searching any person, but particularly young people, we have to have certain grounds that have to be there. My officers that are undertaking such should be quite clearly outlining to any member of the public that they are stopping and searching those grounds. They should be clearly articulating, outlining those. All our officers wear body-worn video at all times. So if you have any concerns regarding those individual issues, if there are specific people want to raise a complaint or say this to anybody, then any interaction will be recorded. So we review it and make sure that our officers have acted lawfully, with decent manners and in an appropriate fashion. I know you mentioned about a twirl. That doesn't appear like something that should be taking place, if I'm being entirely honest with you. There might be reason for that. I can't think of a good one off the top of my head. What I can assure you in respect of the work that we undertake in respect of our stop and search, the vast majority of stop and searches are reviewed every stop and search is reviewed by a supervisor, but I have a continuous improvement team who do random checks of stop and searches where they watch the body-worn video, they make sure that the grounds are appropriate, that the officer's behaviour is appropriate, to make sure that we learn and to make sure that we are only doing what we should be doing within the laws of the land. To take that further, we do look at disproportionality in respect to our stop and search data, and what we do is we take that to our IAG. I don't know if you've ever been to one of our IAGs, which is an independent scrutiny panel ostensibly for how the police undertake their business, and if you haven't, I will gladly invite you to the next one and you can come. And what we do is we work with all members of the community. We'll show them some stop and searches. We will deliver and outline any disproportionality of the data to try and make sure that we're doing things correctly and within the law that we are undertaking that. And again, if you have any specific concerns, I will gladly have a look at those matters outside of this meeting for you. No problem at all. The only way that we can learn is if people tell us that there are things that we're not doing quite right, so we can pick up on that. But we do have real levels of scrutiny on all our stop and searches. As I say, all my officers, when they leave the station, have to have body-worn video on. And all of those are subject to an immediate line manager review, but the vast majority also get a secondary review by my continuous improvement team. And if there are any learning that needs to be picked out from that, then that is robustly delivered.
Thank you for that. So, Julie, do you want to come back on the
on the Park Ward issue? Yeah, thanks very much, Councillor Evans. Just to let Children's Scrutiny know that there is a Park Ward stakeholders group that meets regularly. From Children's Services, Di Drury, who's just joined us, actually, who's the Assistant Director for Children's Social Care, and Dan Smith, who manages the Youth Justice Service and Youth Service, are heavily involved in that group. And that group is actually developing a much more wider ranging and all-encompassing youth strategy for the Park Ward area. So that's being worked on at the moment. This has arisen, but partly due to bonfire night and wanting to keep young people safe in that area. So there's quite a lot of work going on, and obviously youth work provision is delivered in so many different places, sometimes by faith groups, sometimes by sports clubs, and right across the piece, including HIMAT. But I've actually dropped into the chat for you a link to a squash club that's there for men and for men's mental health. It started out, but it's actually had 300 young people from Park Ward actually taking place in positive activities, learning how to play squash. I'm just putting that in as an example of there's an awful lot that goes on in a lot of our communities, and sometimes we don't know what's there. So as a partnership as well, we are trying to make sure we do get a full directory of services so that everybody knows, you know, what is there for our young people. But there is a youth strategy being developed for Park Ward, specifically, Councillor Fazal, at the moment, and I'm sure you're probably involved in that through the Park Ward Stakeholders Group.
Yeah, with regards to the squash, I know the lad who runs it. I have a lot of respect for him. He does it in terms of, I think it's just a charity, where he is partly charity and other funding. But he's been doing that for a long, long time now. It's nothing new. I've had the pleasure of speaking to him on many occasions. I think he does a fantastic job. But I think, you know, in terms of, as you said rightly, we are looking into Park, and hopefully we'll be in a better position for the future. Thank you for that, Julie.
Thank you. And moving on now to Helen, Councillor Riveron, welcome. Gather you had problems in terms of...
sorry, had a bit of a nightmare journey back from work.
Yes.
It sort of links to some of the points you've had as raised, and that's in terms of how youth service and the police sort of perhaps work effectively together. I mean, I think probably the reality is that in my area of Ovenden, I'm probably more in Park Ward, there are going to be young people who have negative perceptions of the police, and the picture of policing by consent is a really important one, and building trust within the community is a really important one. And I think the youth, the youth service offers primarily offering good opportunities for young people, but clearly we want positive diversionary things that will stop people getting involved in antisocial behaviour. And one of the issues I think sometimes is that there are times when the youth services will need additional backup from the police, but they'll obviously want it to be done in a way that isn't going, which doesn't break down the trust with young people, if that makes sense. And I'm just wondering how we can work effectively together so we have, you know, the positive role the youth services do, but the support of the police there as well. But as I said, at the same time, building up that trust.
Ashley, Chair, if I can just come in, please.
Just a sec. I mean, Helen, do you want a response to that?
Well, yeah, I said on like clear, I don't want to sound any way critical of anybody because everybody's asking for the very best intentions. But I think sometimes youth service I mean, I know an issue in my ward where there have been issues of antisocial behaviour. Youth service want the involvement of the police, but they've wanted in a way that isn't going to put young people off attending. And it's getting that balance right between the services. That makes sense.
That's an observation as a question, which is absolutely fine. But yeah, Mick, did you want to come back on that, or?
No, it was just. I think the really valid point that's been raised, and we do try and make sure it is a fine line. Sometimes it's very difficult for the police because if criminality has been alleged, then we're at liberty to become involved in that level of criminality, and we're at liberty to investigate. But we do have, and I know you probably missed it a little bit of an earlier input, but we do have a quite successful early intervention team that work really closely with youth services to try and look at diversionary tactics and try both reduce demand but also steer young people away from criminality, but also even beyond that, actually trying to early identification of young people who may be perhaps making poor life choices, to try and work with them to try and stop any offending before it starts, also to try and make sure that we keep everybody within the community safe. But it is a challenge, and it is a very delicate balance. I know Gary Panther and his team within the neighbourhoods, through Inspector Graham, Inspector Doty, do an awful lot of work and engagement to try and make sure that we're all collectively moving forward, but it's something I'm very alive to.
Good.
Yeah.
Thank you for that.
I do recognise it's a delicate balance, certainly. Thank you.
Yeah. And Shaz, did you want to come back on that one?
Yeah, these two incidents occurred in the town centre. They weren't in Park Ward. And Michael, I have a lot of respect for police officers. I've got friends in the police force, you know. So a lot of respect. I do understand it's not an easy job. And there is a fine balance, you know. I've historically had friends in the police force. Some have retired, some are still in the police force. So I do have a lot of respect for police officers. But I think, as you rightly said, when there are issues and when we feel there is a need to learn, we need to try and adapt and change when there is a need for change.
I think that's accepted, isn't it? And if you wish to progress this more specific personal one, then I think that can be done through Mick or his colleagues on that one. So
Thank you.
I don't think I've got any other hands showing. I've just got one very quick one, and I think we've spent a fair bit of time on this important subject. There are some, towards the end of the report, page 41, there are priorities for the partnership going forward, which are focused on equality, voice of the child, cost of living, and so on, finishing up with neglect. I suppose all I'm saying there is, in relation to that, is that, you know, those are totally laudable priorities. It would be useful to know what actions are being taken and what achievements are being made in each of those areas, but that's probably for another time, not this evening. So, but can I just put that marker down, please, that, yeah, I respect the priorities. It would be useful to know what's happening and how we're going on in each of those. Any other comments on this one? Questions? Can't see any. Shall we move on to what is actually item 7, where we change the order of things? Item 7 is an update on the front door services. And is that Di? Are you dealing with that one, I think?
Yes, I'm happy to, Councillor Evans, thank you. And apologise, I've only just joined the call as well. I've also had that horrendous 2-hour journey home from Halifax tonight. Oh, hey. So I don't know what's going on in the centre of Huddersfield, but it's a bit of a nightmare. Right. Yeah, so obviously colleagues on the call, members of Scrutiny have had the report of the front door services, and I've brought along with me the service manager. Zel Radovic is on the call, so if there are any questions, then obviously myself and Zel will be happy to answer those. I'll just give a couple of highlights if that's all right. Didn't want to obviously take time to take people right through it, because I know, you know, people's time is precious, but the report, hopefully everybody's had time to have a look at it. It does contain some helpful data. It's a view of the work of our front door, particularly focusing on the MAST, the multi-agency screening team that we have with social care staff and police and health and education colleagues working together, who take all the initial contacts and screen them that become either referrals into social care or go on to our early help services and our early help hub. And it's a snapshot look really back at the whole of 2022. So I asked Zel to put some data in which covers sort of January 22 up to January 23, you know, for last year. So hopefully that's helpful to people. Just to summarise, I'm just going to say a few points. I think what it evidences is good, strong performance in our front door. That's continued. You know, we've seen that the last number of years, and we had a front door health check a few years ago, and we're seeing a continuation really of that good, strong performance. By that I mean, you know, timeliness, how we're processing work, looking at the outcomes that we're getting for children and families. We have seen an increased demand. You'll see that from the data, particularly in the latter half of last year. We're not on our own in Calderdale with that we've seen that's a pattern that's going across many local authorities and certainly across West Yorkshire. So we're not out of kilter on that. And what we think it might be related to the cost of living pressures and the pressures on families, you know, in society and poverty, that we've seen a bit of a rise in that. A lot of our referrals tend to be sort of related, that become social care referrals are related to neglect or domestic violence, and we've seen a rise in incidents in that. That is levelling out a bit now, so we're seeing that plateau a little bit as we go into 23. So just to provide some reassurance, it's not going up and up and not coming down. We've been looking at the January and February figures, and it is starting to level out, which is a good sign, although the team are still very busy. Rizal can give you more detail if you wish, but we do have quite a stable staffing team in there. We did have staffing pressures, and we were very grateful to get the support of a project team to come in and help us out when I came into post last summer, because I was a bit worried about the staffing and we were having great difficulty recruiting agency staff at that time. That situation has improved, and actually we're getting recently some permanent recruitment into the team and some students. We've had 4 students recently who want to stay and continue working with us in the MAST, which is brilliant. So we're in the process of recruiting them. So the project team that we've had have also been helping out with our assessment service, but they will be coming to an end at the end of March. They'll be moving on because we don't feel we require them anymore, because we've stabilised the staffing in there. We've got excellent partnership working with our partners, and we've got increased capacity recently from both education and health. So we had a part-time education person in the MAST, and that's now become a full-time post. Lots of that liaison work with schools, supporting us where we get those notifications in around domestic violence, and that work we do to work closely with our schools to support children. And we're getting extra health resource as well, which is really welcome. Zell and his managers have regular operational meetings with their respective partners in health at their level. And we have just set up a new strategic group, if you like. It's called a Front Door Partnership Board. And we have the first meeting of that this week, actually. So I'm chairing that board, which is going to be quarterly. And our senior personnel from police and health and education are meeting with us in that group, myself and Zell, looking at performance, looking at quality, you know, discussing any issues that are arising and looking at future developments as well. Zell has quite a robust quality assurance process in the MAST, in the Front Door. So lots of auditing goes on, lots of auditing that service does, but also audits with our partners as well. And on the whole, we're getting, you know, good, strong results from those outcomes. As you can see, Zell's referred to some of the positive things that, you know, we're seeing from those. Obviously, we pick up on any issues straight away, but we are getting some really good outcomes in terms of timeliness, that, you know, our strong decision making. We're seeing good social work analysis, and we are seeing the child's voice and lived experience coming through, good information sharing with partners. Some of those things that we're looking for in audit are really shining through, you know, not in 100% of the cases, but in the vast majority of the cases, which is what we're looking for. Just in terms of the future, the service has got a plan, like all of our services, to kind of develop and strengthen going forward, learning from best practice in other areas. And we've already done some collaboration looking at Wakefield's Front Door, and we have Wakefield's Front Door manager come and meet with Zell and look at our front door, and we've been linking up with Kirklees as well. So we're trying to do lots of, you know, linking up with our neighbours just to share good practice, really good ideas. And we are looking to further strengthen our early help hub, because what we do know, one of the things we've recognised looking at data, is quite a lot of contacts and requests come into the front door, the MAST. So those early contacts come in that don't always need to become referrals into children's social care. So it's that sifting through, really. And sometimes some of that's just requests for information. You know, they don't mean to be ringing us at all. They could be ringing someone else. Sometimes it's that low level concern where really it needs to be with early help. So we do pass those cases on, but having looked at the system, you know, I feel that we could probably do a bit more to strengthen the links between the MAST and our early help hub, which is also a multi-agency hub, which Sharon Field leads. And Zell and Sharon and I talk all the time, you know, together, and we're looking at developing that closer working and a kind of consultation line for, you know, professionals to ring in if they have a concern. Probably really helpful for schools, so they can have a conversation with us before they necessarily put in a, you know, a contact or a request for a service, and then we can kind of direct people better. So there are things, as always, we can do to improve. Hopefully I've given you some of the highlights now, and I know I want to leave space for any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Di. That's good. And once again, another report with lots of data for us to wade through. So for data geeks, that's quite good. And I'll just kick off with one of them. You've got a number of graphs in there, charts in there. 1.6 rate of completed assessments per 10,000 children, 0 to 17. It's interesting to see that we are significantly above that of England and the SNs. Is that good, bad, indifferent? Although the figures have gone up quite high, and then they're dipping back towards the other norms. What's the significance of that, please?
Perhaps some clarification.
Zell, do you want to come in?
Yes,
Yeah.
perhaps,
Let's explain
some
what
clarification.
SNs is as well.
First of all, let me introduce myself properly. I'm Zell Radevich, and I'm service manager for the front door service, consisting of multi-agency screening team, children's assessment team, child exploitation team, and emergency duty team. Nice to meet you all. In respect of single assessment, what we do is we use our single assessment also as child protection report and children looked after reports, while some other local authorities do not do that. And this might be one of the reasons why we have significantly higher number of single assessment than they do. However, our auditing is clearly telling us that actually the quality of those single assessments are really good. They are very analytical. They assess the risk and the family's needs and make appropriate recommendations.
Right, thank you. I don't know whether you've stunned everybody into silence on this one after our very vociferous early one.
I was just going to add on that, Chair, that what that data, the 1.6 you referred to, is
Yes.
I suppose what's encouraging is to see that is coming a bit more into line with our statistical neighbours with England, which is good, although we're still a bit higher, because obviously we were quite high at some point, weren't we? 2019, very high. So we would be curious about, are we doing, assessments perhaps on too many families, assessments on too many children that are not necessary. So we would want to kind of see that coming more into the normal range like it is now. But as Elle said, there could be a factor in terms of how we're counting assessments, because they're getting used for multiple purposes in Calderdale in terms of child protection conferences, which is not always the same elsewhere. So there's a bit of a CAS counting factor, I think, within that as well.
Yes. Yeah, interesting. I've got some hands coming up here. I've got Dot, Danielle, and I see that Brenda's there as well. Dot Foster, Councillor Foster.
Thanks, Chair. Just looking at the domestic risk assessment management meetings. Obviously, these numbers appear to be quite high from what you've put in the report, but it refers to the number of incidents. Do you have the figures of the number of families that are affected by those incidents? It would be interesting to know how the two correlate and whether or not there is, it's working out at roughly, sort of one incident per family, or so we get an idea of how many families are actually involved with all of this, because it's quite an alarming number, particularly Q2, 129 incidents discussed at the daily risk management meetings. I mean, that's huge, isn't it? The numbers of children involved as well. Are those each individual children? Are they sort of multiple referrals from the same families that come back and are discussed multiple times? I hope that makes sense.
I do understand the question. Do you want to answer that, Sal?
Yeah, this is actually the number of incidents. This might be multiple incidents within the same family. And these are the incidents that are discussed at our daily domestic risk assessment management meetings. It might be some of those incidents that have occurred, or these are all the incidents that have occurred the previous day. But there might be actually families with repeated incidents of domestic abuse. What is also interesting that we are finding, although the numbers of the incidents appear to be high, they have historically been high in Calderdale. And this is, the police is actually our biggest source of referral, with between 55 to 60, depending on the month, referrals coming through to the police. The police have recently, well, in the past nearly couple of years, started using police protection notifications. And what they do now is actually they are able to report to us directly to Children's Services, in this case, multi-agency screening team actually, from their telephone devices, any incidents that have occurred. What we have seen in Calderdale, I don't know if Mick is still present in here, is actually that the vast majority of the police referrals are of really, really good quality. And it doesn't only inform us about their attendance, it also informed us about the observation of the family home, any discussions that they may have had with parents or carers, any discussions with children and young people, how the children have presented, whether or not there is any food in the home, etc. I don't know if I answered to Councillor Foster. If she needs any further clarification, please come back to me.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very helpful.
Okay. Danielle, Councillor Dorrans, and then I'll come on
Thank
to...
you, Chair. I think it was a good idea to move it to the following the last item, because one of my questions might link to that. So in regards, when I was reading the report, I was thinking that particularly around safeguarding risk and exploitation and domestic violence, all of those are captured because a professional notices something, sees something. What do we do for the children who are missing in education, excluded, the gaps where we don't have professionals who's, I guess, where do the referrals come from? I know Zan referenced the police, but that would usually be after an incident, and I'm thinking more about the early help, the catching things before children, particularly around exclusions, who are already having probably sense of belonging issues, I would think might be at higher risk for looking for somewhere that they might fit a little bit easier. So I just kind of wondered where their journey might be followed and captured a little bit sooner than we've got to the point where there's a police involvement, I suppose.
Yeah.
It lies with our early help services, and perhaps I would be better to answer these.
Yeah, I'm happy to come in.
Thank you.
I think it's a really good point you've raised, Councillor Durrans. I think it, particularly with those young people where there's, what we refer to as hidden harm, and when they're out of sight and out of school, it's always a safeguarding concern for us potentially, isn't it? Been a very sad case on the news today of the Bradford young person who was murdered by her uncle that's in court now, but that young person wasn't attending school, they were being home tutored, and it appears there were little indicators really of what was really going on in that home. So it is always a worry. We do have a children missing education team that sits within our kind of education services, so and they are followed up. So if young people are missing education but are not known to the the kind of home tutoring service, if you like, for regular checks that are made upon them, because obviously parents have a right to homeschool their children. So, if they inform the council that that's what they're going to do, then there is a service that makes checks upon their welfare. But children who are just absent, if you like, from school, then of course we rely very much on the schools to to alert us to that and share concerns with us, which they would do, and we would follow up with Zell's service. I think the concern about children being excluded is also a real one that we're very alert to. We do have a concern about the high number of exclusions in Calderdale, and there's a lot of work being undertaken across the service, really, particularly with Paul Tinsley, my colleague, and the education side of it. But we are working with them in early help as well. So we've just got 2 new posts that are going into Sharon Field service that are particularly going to be working as part of the early help response, part of our early help hub, but looking at where children are at risk of exclusion or have just been excluded, and going into wraparound support for the family. And they will be working quite closely with schools. And what we're trying to get to, what we're trying to develop, is that working understanding with schools that we want them to refer into early help, and particularly those 2 posts that we're just in the process of just developing and recruiting to. we want them to refer in for support before they get to the point of exclusion, you know, because almost it's too late, isn't it, for the child? They've got the trauma, as you say. If they're linked into criminal exploitation or CSE, they're at more risk because they're not in school, and things can break down quite quickly. And we have seen then, you know, we've done a bit of auditing and looking at some of the older children we've had come into care over the last year or so. We can see there's several of those where some of the issues started with a school exclusion, you know, so they've been excluded, and obviously there were problems in the family, but by the time, you know, people have got involved and professionals have got involved, things are quite entrenched, and it can be quite difficult, and on occasions the child's had to leave the home, you know, because things have just broken down. So we're really alert to all that issue, and I think it's just joint working across all the agencies to try and provide a good safeguarding network for those young people, and we rely on partners alerting us, you know, when they become aware of any child in that risky situation.
Yeah,
sounds really promising.
If I just may add, from the Children's Services perspective, one of the reasons why we have asked for educational coordinator to sit within the multi-agency team would be actually to consult and advise schools if it regards to any matters, including missing any safeguarding matters, even if it is advice and information on it that they would be providing for them. And our educational coordinator, who's got really big experience of working with school and also with police, she was a teacher before she came to us. It actually has a vast knowledge with regards to the child protection and will be able to assist us in many aspects when we are dealing with schools.
Thank you. Thank you. Brenda, Councillor Monteith, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yes, thank you, Chair. My question also relates to the child exploitation issue, because that came up in our last item as being a very high profile of anxiety amongst our children and young people. And whilst I see that the child exploitation team are very robust in their response to all forms of child exploitation, I'm just wondering what is proactively being done to educate children and young people about precisely what child exploitation is, because I think a lot of young people are fearing something that is not actually what we would define as child exploitation. So, you know, how are we proactively intervening to make sure that children and young people understand when they are being exploited and when they are not being exploited?
Thank you, Councillor Monteith. If you don't mind, I will take this one, and if you want to add anything else. We do have within our child exploitation team 2 social workers who specialize in child exploitation, but we also have 2 child exploitation project workers. Throughout the past 18 months to 2 years, they have provided actually training for schools, but also for the children in school assembly. A substantial number of schools have now had our 2 child protection exploitation workers coming to them and presenting, explaining to the children and young people actually what child exploitation is about. We have also had some self-referrals from the children themselves as a result of these courses that they have also conducted. And actually the children have come to our child exploitation project worker and told them that now we know what it means. On top of that, from September 2022, at the Orange Box, the child protection workers have actually started conducting sessions, and this is going to continue now for foreseeable future. So they have been extremely proactive, and I know they are under me, but these are the 2 of the most proactive and able people that we could have actually employed in this local authority.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's a good question there, Brenda. Thank you. Dot, you've got your hand up on this one.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm just looking at the inspection, the last that Calderdale had, which was, very, very encouraging. Noting that there was a required improvement for children in need of help and protection, and I wondered if there was to be an inspection tomorrow, do you think this would have improved? What's your gut feeling?
100% without any doubt. We have changed absolutely that need to be changed, and we have updated everything that needs to be updated, including our practice, and we are continuously updating and improving our practice and learning. We also learn from other local authorities. It's stated within my report, both myself and I do also health checks. I would lead on health checks. I would be part of the team. And what we do is not only advising other local authorities, but also bring some learning back. What is a good thing within the small local authority, that if any changes need to happen, anything that needs to be done, it can be done very quickly. I would usually come up with an idea, come to Di and ask whether or not she would agree with that. And that's been changed. Whilst with other local authorities that are a lot bigger, it is a lot more difficult. I know what I'm talking about because I worked for 11 different local authorities. So yes, my answer in short is yes. And we are looking forward actually to having inspection come in to inspect us. There is a confidence within the teams, and they would be more than happy for Ofsted to turn up tomorrow.
That's reassuring.
Thank you.
Very positive. Thank you.
Yeah, indeed. Any further questions on this one from board members? So can I thank the team for your presentation and response to our questions? Thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Evans.
And we will to item 6, which is the report on the attainment progress of pupils in the academic year 21 to 22. And Paul, are you going to kick this one off, Paul Tinsley?
I am Councillor Evans, thank you very much. I have brought the real expert with me, which is my colleague Connie, and she'll be able to answer the tough questions, but I'll start with an overall summary. I'm afraid it's another one with an awful lot of data here, but we have presented a kind of key summary of the messages at the beginning of the report. As always, it's about the story behind the data, isn't it? So just in terms of some of the key messages, I think the first thing to say is it's quite obvious the impact of the pandemic in relation to this data. Outcomes have fallen, education outcomes have fallen right across the country. And also it's difficult to compare with the previous years, the 2 previous years, because of the teacher assessments that were taking place in schools rather than exams. So, with that caveat, one of the things that we can see is that whilst the data, the outcomes have fallen in Calderdale, they haven't actually fallen to the same extent as they have nationally, which is good. I think that talks about the resilience of our schools in terms of their response to the pandemic and being able to keep education and learning going for our children and young people. The possible exceptions in Key Stage 4, but there is a little bit of a caveat there, which I'm sure Connie will share with you, about changes to the way that that data was recorded in terms of exams. And also just to say that, of course, in terms of our secondary schools, the vast majority are academies, and therefore our school effectiveness service doesn't tend to work with our secondary colleagues as much as it does certainly with our primary colleagues. In terms of secondary schools, our support is largely around SEN, admissions, and inclusion, rather than supporting with school effectiveness, because academies tend to have their own school improvement officers. I think the other thing to say that is in terms of Ofsted judgments, we've had a really positive autumn. I think all of our schools have remained good where they've been inspected or outstanding in cases of those that were outstanding, and that pattern has actually continued into the spring term. I think that's some vindication also for our school effectiveness service, who prioritise schools according to red, amber, green. And so where we've had schools of concern that have been rated as red or amber, for example, they've all come through the Ofsted inspections, and that's been largely down to Connie and her team. So I just want to acknowledge that as well. So I think that's just a very quick whistle-stop tour but of course there is a lot of data there. So more than happy to take questions. I'll certainly pass them on to Connie.
Yeah, Connie, do you want to come in on at this stage?
Yeah, I think just to add really, I mean, obviously, you know, as Paul said, you know, after the pandemic, these schools, there was a lot of concern and anxiety, you know, as to how the young people would perform. And I think, you know, it is a celebration in Calderdale because, as Paul said, our results didn't drop as much nationally. And in fact, our, you know, results like our early years and also our phonics were above national. Our Key Stage 1 and 2 were very close to national. And I think Key Stage 4, Paul just referred to that. One of the reasons why that the Progress 8, Attainment 8 dropped was because schools had actually entered children in year 10 to get their qualifications, and the way that they have undertaken the assessment meant that those children's qualifications didn't count. So we're quite confident going through to this year that we will be back above national as we were before. And I think just to share with you, you know, we are, we don't, you know, we want to continue to improve, get our children the best outcomes. And a lot of the things that have been mentioned this evening, you know, Julie's mentioned about the Starting Well board. So we've got lots of things happening there. The Family Hubs initiative, that's got a whole aspect around the learning environment and speech language communication. At Key Stage 4 and 5, we've now got a post-16 strategy that's going to Cabinet later this month. And there's, you know, a lot of the actions within post-16 also link back to pre-16. And just to assure members here, you know, we continue to focus on our vulnerable groups of children. We've mentioned CLAR tonight. We've mentioned SEN children. We've mentioned those disadvantaged free school meals. So I think, you know, we feel that sort of we've got really good relationships with our schools, and we're really able to sort of work with our schools to improve the pupil outcomes. So, you know, we still want to push to be the best. But, you know, in terms of Ofsted, we are, you know, moving towards that national, which is where we want to be.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, members, any queries or questions from you in relation to this? I was going to say data heavy. That gives a totally wrong impression because the data is good, it's important, and it's good to have the summary which you've put there. I was going to jump to almost the end of the report in terms of one of my questions, which was looking at the priorities for improvement, particularly for the primary phase. And you've defined those as being FSM disadvantaged pupils across all key stages, SEND, which we've talked about, support pupils across key stages, and boys across all key stages. I just wonder whether there were specific plans and objectives and dates and times for those things which you've set as your priorities for improvements in the following year.
Yes, so what we do is all our primaries are part of clusters, which you're probably aware about. So what happens is each sort of, as we sort of receive the results for Key Stage 1, 2 early years, schools set their sort of action plans. So for each of our primary clusters and also our secondary cluster, you can see their priorities there. They are set each July, August time. And then we have the School Improvement Partnership Board. So what happens at their first meeting in October is they present the plans there. And I think, you know, what we were pleased about this year is instead of having lots of priorities, as you may be aware, sometimes you get on plans, each cluster is really focused on 2 areas. So, you know, for some, it's a real focus on SEND support. Others, it's a focus on our disadvantage and closing that gap. So we've got all those plans in place. And in fact, we've got a partnership board meeting next Wednesday, and I've actually just sent out on the agenda, we've got all the mid-year progress reports for each of the clusters as well. So again, you know, we're able to sort of monitor those priorities, and obviously at the partnership board next week, that's an opportunity for members of that board to challenge and discuss and find out, you know, what's happening across each of the clusters in Calderdale. So it's a really good mechanism that we use there.
Yeah, good. And in terms of the cash side of things, as we were there talking particularly about primary, again, there are some priorities for improvement. Is there a similar approach being adopted there so that we know whether those things are being achieved?
Yeah, again, I mean, we've got a cash meeting coming up on the 16th of March. And again, what happens at each of their meetings, again, for the partnership board next week, I've submitted their plan as well, to share with members what progress has been made on each of their priorities. And again, myself and Paul attend each meeting. We're there in terms of providing a local authority update, but also we're there to talk through their priorities and obviously support the schools going forward.
And in terms of secondary, we're a very, very, very high proportion of academies in there. How are the relationships evolving there, and having what impact you can have with those separate organisations?
I think Paul might want to come in as well, but I think, you know, we have got really good relationships. So, you know, we can sort of either pick up the phone or sort of discuss things through at cash meetings, at cluster meetings, and talk through priorities and support. And obviously, you know, we've got some of our multi-academy trusts sometimes offering support to our maintained schools. So we've still got 2 maintained secondary schools. So I feel we've got good relationships, and I feel, you know, I know that Paul, you know, will visit schools. Some of our secondary schools he's visited recently. And again, it's that dialogue and ongoing that although they're multi-academy trusts and they're running a different way to maintain schools, it's still about, you know, they're all our children in Calderdale, and we do want to make sure that they get the best.
Yeah, good to hear. I've got some hands up at Danielle and Dot. Danielle, do you want to kick off?
Thanks, Chair. Just a point that you might be able to put me right on. So earlier on, it was said because the schools, particularly secondary or academies, they have their own school improvement officers. But within the report, it says that schools engage with the Calderdale self-improving school system and attend this cluster. Does that mean they bring what their own school improvement officers can and share that at their meetings? Because I don't know if that just appears contradictory to me or if I've read it wrong.
No, what happens is the funding goes through to the clusters of schools, and they are both in each cluster, they're both academies and maintained schools. So that funding that each cluster gets is shared collectively across the schools. So where the clusters have got the priorities, all schools engage in that. And then in terms of our secondary colleagues, they do have those school improvement systems themselves. But again, it's sort of, you know, they're happy to sort of share and talk through some of the work that's going on. And obviously with the government agenda for schools to all be, in multi-academy trusts. If we've got any schools that are maintained and are requires improvement, there's a trust offer there of 4 to 5 days support, and that would come from one of our multi-academy trusts. And we've got 30 in Calderdale, so we have quite a lot of trusts to sort of tap into that support for our maintained schools as well.
Thank you. I've got another question, Chair, but if you can come back to me if that's okay.
Yeah. So Dot, do you want to come in and then we'll go back to Danielle?
Diana has her hand up as well, and her hand before mine, so do ask her first.
I defer to your better.
That's very kind. That's great. It's perhaps more of a comment than a question, actually. Just, I should probably declare a slight interest as the parent of a child who's just done their GCSEs. So it's a bit strange when the results are kind of there to look at, isn't it? And actually, I wanted to make a comment that just about the level of work that's gone into achieving those results from the schools. And my daughter was at one of the maintained secondary schools, which there are only 2, and just to sort of highlight what good results there were from Todd High and how impressive that was. And I suppose it was just following on a little bit from the point that was made before, that I think it's come through in some of the previous reports that we've had, how actually during the pandemic that kind of collaboration across all the schools had really improved. And just sort of highlighting, I think, which you probably sort of already raised slightly, that hopefully that can actually continue to have an ongoing impact, which really does kind of break down those barriers a little bit between the maintained and the academy schools, and sort of keep building on that improvement, perhaps. And do you see that is an ongoing process that can keep being developed?
Yeah, I mean, the relationships were so strong, and they really were very close and very supportive of each other. And I think that continues. And obviously, Paul's mentioned earlier tonight, we've mentioned about the new Inclusion Partnership Board, and obviously, health would have a part to play. So I think it's all about sort of that joint approach to support our children and families. And it's so good to sort of work across and share that intelligence so that, we're able to do the best for the children and families.
Yeah, good to hear. So, may I come on to Dots now? My apologies to Diana.
That's okay. I realised I probably hadn't seen her little orange yellow hand up because it had blended into her background a bit. So sometimes they're not always easy to spot. Been there, done that. Thanks, Chair. I just wondered if you could expand a little bit on. I'm looking at this the table 1A, and in particular the high, middle, and low prior attainers, and the fact that Calderdale's numbers of low prior attainment are significantly higher than is the case nationally. You've explained in the report that partly this is a result of the 2018 Key Stage 1 results, which were relatively weak. But do you have any more information to sort of pad that out a little bit, of why those results were weak, and importantly, what is being done to address that so that we see an improvement next time we have this report through? Thank you.
I think it would be a mixture of different factors, if I'm honest. And I think sort of, if you think about sort of the time that children had out of their education during the pandemic, and we had the vulnerable children in, we had then sometimes, closed down for children. We had to follow up children who perhaps families were anxious about sending their children into school as well because of all the messages around the pandemic. And I think, for example, one of the areas we're focused on this year is on writing, because again, we had a lot of the online learning. So that took away the opportunity for children to write. So that's something we're working on. And I think also the lower prior attainers, there's an awful lot of anxiety about for the children. And it's sort of, making sure we've got the right support going into schools to support them and the right interventions. And clearly some of our, disadvantaged children would fall into that category. And if you look sort of, as we do in detail, it's often sort of white British boys, who sometimes would also have a SEND need. So there's a whole mixture of different factors, but schools are, very clearly sort of making the right interventions for those children and reaching out where we've got support services outside school, or, as I said about the cluster model, schools are coming together to share that good practice. So I think it's a range of factors, but just to assure you, schools are looking at that to support those learners to be the best they can.
That's good to hear. Danielle, did you have another question you wanted to come back with?
I think some of the answer that was just given probably referenced some of it. I was just wondering, in regards to the Inclusion Partnership Board, how do you think that will complement that work further, I guess? Because it says all the head teachers are on board, which is absolutely brilliant. I kind of just would like a bit more of an expansion on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that, Chair. I mean, I think we said a lot about partnerships, and given that we have so many different multi-academy trusts working in the area, I want to be absolutely honest, it is a challenge. We're dealing with a number of different organisations, so it's not like the days where we were just dealing with local authority maintained schools. There are so many different brands and varieties of governance across our schools. So it is a challenge to keep all of our schools working together. But we feel that is there is a strong partnership. It could be better, of course, and because there is an element of competition as well. But I think one of the things, and just to pick up on the education inclusion and the whole inclusion issue, I think that is one area where schools in particular are really keen to work together. So just an example, we've reviewed our fair access protocol, and that's working really well. So you've got peer moderation and particularly for secondary heads being on that panel, and they are moderating their peers. So in terms of those young people who are very hard to place into school, we've got head teachers sitting on that panel and actually allocating places to their peers in other schools, and they have all signed up to basically participate in that process. And they, on the whole, there are challenges from time to time, but on the whole, they do accept the decisions of their peers and they respect the decisions of their peers. So yes, partnership is strong. There's still more to be done. And we talked about exclusions, and that's a challenge. But overall, I think there is a strong commitment to partnership working across our schools.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you.
Thank you. Felicity, Councillor Issett, you've got your hand up now.
Just on the back of the sort of partnership work and the fair access I can't remember what the piece stands for, I've lost it now. But just how are we as a council supporting schools that receive significant numbers of in-year transfers that might be under PAN for various reasons? Because we know that schools generally under PAN are the ones under PAN because they've got bad Ofsted reports or because they've been historically had it, and then there as a result can sometimes fall foul of other schools and students wanting to move in-year transfers, and then they get this negative cycle of having loads and loads of in-year transfers. So how are we ensuring that the schools across Calderdale, specifically the outstanding schools, are taking their fair share of students in year, and that they're not all being sort of not all having to go down one route at one particular school, which is under PAN, which is likely to be in difficult circumstances in the first place?
Yeah. That's absolutely a fair question, Councillor Issa, and that's the very reason that we've actually renewed our fair access panel. So there was a concern, and particularly from those schools who had places, that they were actually taking more than their fair share of children with challenging behaviour and those hard to place pupils. Now, the whole purpose of a fair access panel, and the word fair is the clue, is that there is a fair distribution of those challenging and hard to place young people. So even where a school might not have places because they are oversubscribed, under the fair access protocol, they can be required, and they will be required, to take their fair share of places. And so the feedback that we've had from our schools, and actually particularly from those schools who are undersubscribed, who've been struggling with this particular issue, the feedback's been really positive, that it's been really helpful to them, that other schools who are oversubscribed are now taking their fair share of these pupils. So it is early days, but we feel that the early feedback from the fair access panel, as it's been revised, is actually really positive.
That's good to hear.
It might be, just to come back on that, it might be good to look at some figures about the schools that we've got in the area and how many sort of in-year transfers each school has taken. It might be nice for us to look at that, because I am acutely aware of the sort of working in secondary schools in disadvantaged areas. I've worked in Calderdale, I don't anymore, I work outside, but I'm acutely aware that causes many issues.
Sure.
And feelings of ill will as well.
Would
Sometimes.
to provide that in data for us?
We could, Councillor Evans, yes. We're collecting data at each fair access panel. So the panel's chaired by myself, but my colleague, obviously Richard Morse, within the admissions team, does collect that level of data. So I'm sure we'd be happy to provide that information on a future occasion. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for that, Felicity. Good question there. Thank you. Helen, Councillor Riveron.
Well, it actually goes on for that, because I mean, I think it is always important, the issue of fair access, and that, you know, with any school you want to have a sort of a critical mass of pupils who across the ability range, and that too many challenging people should not all be amassed in one school, because clearly that does cause massive problems, and it's much better for everybody if they're distributed fairly. But I suppose the thing from that is, how well do those pupils fare after they're placed there? Because if someone is placed unwillingly, you know, is that school actually going to be committed to the needs of that pupil? So I think, as well as looking the access and admissions, we want to look at how well does that school meet those pupils' needs once they're there, or are they meeting them rather reluctantly, or possibly the system being gamed for them to be moved on again.
You're so cynical for one so young, Helen.
Well, I have worked in education 35 years. I don't want to suggest I'm being cynical. I think sometimes, if I'm honest, the system from above, government level, DFA, Ofsted downwards, does encourage people to play games. And if you have a system that encourages people to game the system, it's scarcely surprising if some people do that. I'm not blaming any of the schools. I just know the sort of pressures that people are under.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Riveron. You obviously understand the education system well, and yes, indeed, it is a challenge. And again, coming back to the Education Inclusion Partnership Board, this is one of the areas that we want to just ensure that that schools are being held to account. It's challenging for us as a local authority. Our powers are very limited now. And I think, you know, going back to the exam results to some extent, I think that's a testament to the quality of work that goes on with our schools, because, you know, years ago you were talking about school budgets in the millions of pounds for local authorities to support school improvement. We've had to go to School Forum this year to ask for all of the funding. And it's not an awful lot of money. So we, you know, the days of screaming and shouting and banging on the desk and holding people responsible, you know, are long gone. And it is very much about trust and partnerships and peer moderation. So, and that's the whole purpose of this inclusion partnership is to ensure that all of our schools not only take their fair share, but they commit to the journey with those young people as well. And there will be a level of accountability within that education inclusion partnership.
That's good to hear, and I'm pleased to hear about this inclusion partnership board, and it's taking off and obviously having an impact, which is good. I'm aware of time this evening. We've had a fairly serious agenda and some good questions and responses. So unless there are any further questions, I would like to just move on to the final item of the agenda, which is the work plan for the future. Ben, are you going to talk us through that? Do you have any particular points to make on it?
Yeah, good evening everyone. Just on the work programme for the future, so the next meeting, which is on the 29th, I believe, as Julie mentioned earlier, we're having the local response to the McAllister review, which I believe Di is going to be presenting. We've also got the EHNA survey results and a progress report on healthy schools. So it's going to be quite a long agenda. But I just wanted to raise as well that we are due to have soon the quarterly caseload report for children and young people's services. Now, I was wondering whether in fact it might make sense to have that at the start of the next, as it were, council year, because what's in that report may well dictate matters that the Scrutiny Board wishes to consider in the future.
I think that would be eminently sensible to do, because it will help determine the work programme for the next municipal year, won't it? So, but do other board members have concerns about that? I think that will be a useful thing to do. So yes, I can't see anybody tearing their hair out as that suggestion. So please, can we go on that basis? Thank you. And any other comments or suggestions in terms of the work programme at the moment?
Well, I was wondering how quickly Paul might be able to get us the data about the in-year school transfers, because obviously that's something that's been expressed about tonight, and that may be something that we want to bring back early in the next year. Paul,
is that something you can?
Yeah, we can certainly look at that. Just a slight caveat that we look after the fair access process in terms of those young people that are coming into the area, and we oversee that process. But in terms of managed moves between schools, the local authority doesn't currently manage that process. That's something that the schools manage themselves. But we could certainly provide a report about the number of schools that are taking young people under the fair access process. That's something we could update on, as soon as you would like that information, really.
Is that useful, Ben?
Yeah, that's useful. I'll liaise with Paul about how quickly we could get that.
Excellent. So thank you one and all for this evening. A long, heavy evening, but very useful. So thank you for all those who've contributed and been part of it. And we've got one quite soon again. They sort of come quite close together this month. So I look